Over the last few months, Israel has been waging a secret war in Syria, and it's gotten to the point where a brand new jihadi group has been stood up exclusively to counter Israeli operations. Now, while most of the world is focused on Israeli actions in Lebanon, Gaza, the West Bank, trying to counter Iran and dealing with the Houthis down in Yemen, meanwhile, kind of under the radar, Israeli airstrikes and ground incursions into Syria have significantly increased in recent weeks. Now, to give a little backstory here, on December 8th, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that the IDF had temporarily seized control of the demilitarized buffer zone in the Golan Heights. This 235 square kilometer zone was created under the 1974 disengagement agreement between Israel and Syria that ended the Yom Kippur War. And essentially at this point, with the fall of the Assad regime, one of the signatories to this agreement, Israel said, hey, this thing is no longer valid because the other party to this agreement no longer exists. Then a few weeks later, just on February 25th, Netanyahu called on South Syria to be demilitarized due to the threat from the Syrian government forces and terrorist organizations. Big picture here, they're essentially saying we don't know what this next government under HTS and Jolani is going to look like, and we want to make sure that these fighting positions, these outposts, these bunkers, there were tanks even found in some of these areas, can't be taken over and utilized by any force or organization that might be hostile to Israel. Makes sense. Kind of get where they're going, but it has picked up quite a bit in recent weeks. So taking a look just here over the course of the last month or so at some of the airstrikes, on March 3rd, the IDF struck a military site where they said weapons belonging to the previous Syrian regime were stored. The IDF continues to monitor developments in the area and will act as necessary in order to defend the citizens of the state of Israel. Then on March 10th, Israel says fighter jets struck radars and detection assets used for constructing aerial intelligence assessments in southern Syria. In addition, command positions and military sites containing weapons and military equipment belonging to the Syrian regime in southern Syria were struck. The presence of these assets in southern Syria posed a threat to the state of Israel and IDF activities. These targets were struck in order to eliminate future threats. 1 week later, March 17th, they said the IDF is currently striking military targets in southern Syria, including command centers and military sites containing weapons and military vehicles belonging to the old Syrian regime, which they are attempting to make reusable. The presence of military assets in southern Syria poses a threat to the state of Israel. Another week after that, March 25th, Israel conducted airstrikes on Syrian army positions in Dara, specifically targeting the 132nd Brigade and the 175th Regiment. These strikes were part of a broader campaign to weaken Syria's military capabilities, and just this week, April 2nd, the IDF launched airstrikes on multiple locations, including military bases in Hama and Homs, as well as military infrastructure in the Damascus area. The IDF stated that these operations were conducted to prevent the use of military bases and facilities left from the Assad regime era. Now, we are going to get to, in today's video, a couple key points here. Of course, who they're actually fighting at this point, because it's not necessarily the Syrian government, but also kind of is in a way. And then the international reaction. As you can imagine, there's a lot of organizations and countries around the world not very happy with this. And their argument is that Syria is trying to get on its feet, trying to figure out how to govern its country. And meanwhile, they've got the Israeli armed forces conducting significant airstrikes across the country and, as we'll get into now, moving ground forces into Syrian territory. So starting on March 8th, they say in the past week, soldiers of the Paratroopers Brigade, the Armored Corps, and the Yahalom Unit, my apologies in the pronunciation there, under the command of the 474th Brigade, conducted targeted raids based on intelligence indications in Syria. The troops located, confiscated, and dismantled numerous weapons, including rifles, ammunition, missiles, and additional military equipment. The IDF will continue operations to eliminate any threat and strengthen the defense of the state of Israel and its citizens. And we've got a lot of pictures of the weapons that have been recovered in southern Syria. Again, when we look back to the fall of the Assad regime, it was very sudden. It is a matter of, no, don't worry about this, nothing real is going to happen, to it looks like Assad is going to hold Damascus, to 12 hours later, he had fled the country, was in Russia, and the entire country had collapsed. So a lot of these outposts, a lot of these military facilities and locations were just abandoned, on the spot. Moving to March 25th, the IDF says in recent weeks, troops from the Paratroopers Brigade combat team, along with soldiers from the Yahalom unit, operated in several locations following intelligence indications and located numerous weapons, including explosives, ammunition, mortar shells, military vests, combat equipment, munitions, and bullets. All of the items were located, were confiscated, and dismantled. And then just yesterday, April 3rd, Syrian news agency Sana reported that the IDF conducted a ground incursion near the city of Nawa in southwestern Syria. They say this operation led to armed confrontation confrontations, resulting in the death of at least 9 individuals. Israeli forces reported seizing weapons and destroying terrorist infrastructure during the incursion. Now, those deaths or casualties in this case appear to have been on the side of the terrorist organization or the people inside of Syria, not with Israeli forces, or at least as of now, there's no indication from Israel that any of their forces were killed or wounded in that operation. Now, this brings about the question of who exactly is Israel fighting? The Assad regime is gone. Right now, there's some remnants remaining in portions of Syria, no doubt, but these constant operations, especially when they're engaged in direct fire confrontations like was reported just yesterday, and it looks like the organization now that has kind of been stood up out of nowhere is the Islamic Resistance Front in Syria. So another jihadi group, because who doesn't need more of those, I guess, right? So looking over to some experts here in Long War Journal, there was an article recently published by Joe Truzman and Admad Sharawi, my apologies in the pronunciation there, where they say on January 7th, the Front for the Liberation of the South announced its formation as a resistance movement, emphasizing that it compromises various segments of the Syrian population and has no allegiances to any political organization. 4 days later, the group changed its name to Great Might, the Islamic Resistance Front in Syria. Now, I'm going to put up a picture here to show their flag, and we'll show that a couple other times in today's video. But look, according to Critical Threats here, and this is where the flag is coming from, they say it's abnormal that an independent militia would use iconography widely associated with Iranian-backed actors. So on this picture here, you see the new flag or symbol of the Islamic Resistance Front in Syria, which they say is completely independent. More on that in a second, because they kind of changed their tune, understandably so. But on here, you'll also see the flag of Hezbollah, Lebanese Hezbollah, a major Iranian proxy, of course, and then the IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So it would be quite the coincidence if the imagery just happened to be the same across all 3 of those. But moving back over here to the Long War Journal, they say the Islamic resistance in Syria came into sharper focus after the collapse of the Bashar al-Assad regime in late 2024, which created a power vacuum in much of Syria. While some areas fell under local governance or rival factions, Iranian-backed groups moved quickly to consolidate control in key parts of southern and western Syria. From this context, the Islamic resistance emerged as a coalition of Syrian and foreign fighters, including Iraqis, Afghans, and Lebanese Hezbollah members, with the declared purpose of resisting Israeli and Western presence in Syria. This kind of raises, I think, a very valid question of kind of the chicken or the egg. So if this group was kind of a loose association of, popular mobilization forces and Hezbollah, things like that, and then once Israel starts moving into Syria, they come together with this sole purpose of countering Israel, would they have been there? Would they exist without the Israeli incursions? Or is it exclusively a response to those actions? It's something to think about, and we'll keep an eye on as we learn more about this group. Back to Long War Journal, they say the group is ideologically aligned with Iran's axis of resistance, a regional strategy that includes Hezbollah in Lebanon, popular mobilization forces in Iraq, and the Houthis down in Yemen. Its formation mirrors the rise of other Iranian-backed militias elsewhere, loosely structured at first, operating in coordination with Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, Quds Force, and gradually adopting a more organized military and political presence. And some of, actually going back to Joe Truzman, some of his statements right out the gate when we started learning about these was, hey, be careful. We're not entirely sure that this is even a real organization at this point. That's how kind of out of nowhere they came, if you will. Now at this point, that was a couple months ago. Now it looks like this is very much a real organization. They say the Islamic Resistance Front in Syria announced it is part of the Iranian-led axis of resistance and the religious extension of the Battle of the Promise of the Hereafter, a reference to the Quranic verse that has been interpreted as the final battle to liberate Palestine. And then on February 28th, 2 days after Israeli airstrikes in southern Syria, the group announced that other unidentified military factions had joined it to prepare for the, quote, promise of the hereafter against Israel. So again, the overall larger battle against Israel. A lot still unknown about this organization. I think that what we can say at this point is that it does exist. It's real. They are carrying out operations against Israel. It looks like they may have tried a couple times to fire short-range rockets and mortars at Israeli forces, maybe even into Israeli territory. And it does sound like in some of these ground incursions into Syria, this is the group, the Islamic Resistance Front in Syria, that is fighting back and actually shooting at Israeli forces as they advance. Then turning over to the international response here, because again, this kind of secret war that's not getting a lot of attention, while everybody's looking at all these other fronts, it is obviously an issue. It's an issue not just for Israel, but an issue for Syria and the broader region. The United Nations, through their special envoy for Syria, condemned Israel's repeated attacks, stating that, quote, they undermine efforts to build a new Syria at peace with itself in the region and destabilize Syria at a sensitive time. The Syrian government put out a statement, their foreign ministry, labeling these Israeli strikes as a blatant violation of international law, an attempt to destabilize the country. The president, al-Shara, emphasized that Syria is too exhausted from years of conflict to engage in a new confrontation with Israel and is seeking diplomatic solutions to its crises. Now, for what it's worth, I haven't heard any overt threats from the current Syrian government directed at Israel. If you go back to previous iterations of HTS and, of course, al-Qaeda in Iraq or some of the al-Nusra Front, there certainly were threats made against Israel. But then you kind of get into the argument of, have they changed? Is this really a different setup? Are these really different people with different beliefs? Are they focused on Syria? Were they genuine in the past when they talked about threatening and wanting to destroy Israel? So it's there, it's included, but as of recently, as of their takeover of the Syrian government, I've not seen anything official from Syria directed at Israel. And then, not all that unsurprising, Turkey's not real happy about this. Turkey does have geopolitical interest in Syria, of course, and they still back some proxy forces there, especially in the north. They've expressed concern over Israel's actions, accusing Israel of attempting to provoke ethnic and religious divisions in Syria. And I should note, there was speculation, I'll have to double check this, that an Israeli airstrike in Syria actually killed a couple Turkish soldiers a couple days ago, but stand by for verification on that. So overall, we are seeing a general uptick in Israeli operations into Syria just in the course of the last couple weeks. It's pretty clear based off of IDF announcements that we're not getting the day-by-day that we would out of Gaza or even southern Lebanon against Hezbollah. These are more like weekly roll-ups, which is why it's like 6 to 7 days apart we hear of over the course of the past week. And then there's just not a lot of information there. So again, this whole operation in Syria kind of flying under the radar right now, and we'll yet to see exactly where this takes us. But that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.